Hello, everyone, and welcome to Musing, music for the adventurous listener here on CJSW 90.9 FM in Calgary and on all your favorite podcast platforms. I'm your host, Janna Sailor. Thanks so much for tuning in. Musing is a show where we explore the creative minds shaping the soundscape of our time. And today we're diving into the musical world of Frank Horvat, a composer and pianist known for turning the everyday into art. Frank's work lives at the intersection of contemporary classical, electronic experimentation, and deeply human storytelling. His compositions have tackled everything from climate anxiety to social justice, blending meticulous craft with raw emotional honesty. Frank Horvat is a multi-genre composer who weaves stories through his melodies, harmonizing emotions and captivating audiences around the globe. Frank Horvat is one of the most inventive composers and songwriters to come out of the contemporary scene and has made the tricky musical leap that allows him to pursue a niche of his very own, and his music is featured on over 20 albums. So settle in and get inspired. This is Musing with Frank Horvat. So welcome, Frank. Thanks so much for joining me today on Musing.
It's a pleasure to join you, Janna. Nice to finally chat.
It's been such a pleasure to read some wonderful reviews that you've amassed over the years that describe your compositional output. But most importantly, I'd love to know how you describe yourself as a composer and a creator.
It's funny, there's a really great piece of music that I love. This composer, I think he's American from Michigan, and he basically, what he did was he sampled, I think in the 1990s, he sampled like a orchestra and he like spliced everything together, and he wrote a piece called "What Kind of Music Do You Write?" And he basically wrote a piece about what it's like to be asked the question as a composer, what kind of music do you write? And I love that piece because he basically went on with the vulnerability of the artist, saying, how do you perceive yourself and that type of thing. But I think that for me, what I do, first and foremost, from a very sort of a spiritual thing in my creative process, one of the things that I sort of do every time I compose a new piece of music is, as I'm going through the process, two things. I have to be engaged with the sound. I actually genuinely have to like it and it engage me. But also, I often ask myself, have I ever heard this before? I think one of the things that especially in sort of a very postmodern type of thing, I pull influences and inspirations from everywhere, all genres, musical, non-musical, and I just put this into this big pot of soup that I mix together and do all my things. But first and foremost, even though, I consider myself a postmodernist and that type of thing, I ask myself, have I ever heard this before? Because it's important for me to put my personal sound. I'm a huge audiophile. I love listening to music. I love going to concerts. So I'm just a music fan. And so I'm not going to try to replicate something that's already done, even though I might be inspired by it. And that's why, in general, a lot of my stuff out there is all over the place, to be blunt. I think, I've had people tell me before who are a little more entrepreneurial, and that you should just maybe narrow down on certain things, and I compose things, and like people have told me sometimes they listen to this and that and they're like, I can't believe that was composed by the same person. And I can be tonal a lot, I can be very minimalist, I can go very dissonant or atonal in some things, and it really just what's the calling of the particular project. I just feel drawn to go in a particular direction of what sort of does justice to the project and what I'm trying to do.
So, in that context, talk to me about your latest album, the Banff Suite, for solo, piano, and the inspiration and the vision for it.
This has been a really special project in my life. It's sort of been a long time coming. 4 years ago, I was invited to attend a residency at the Banff Center. And that was a really special thing for me. I actually never been to the Banff Center. I hate to admit it, but if you're a Canadian musician, former composer, just an hour walk of life, all the people in our music community in Canada, I don't think I've ever met anybody other than myself who had never been to the Banff Center. It's ridiculous. I felt like, oh my God, this is such a long time coming. And it was sort of unique because I was supposed to go before the fall of 2021, but then of course we know the pandemic happened and then they were gradually reopening. And actually I was like the first artist back on campus to do an independent residency. So it was sort of eerie. One of the cool things about Banff that I hear from everybody is the camaraderie and the community and the people you meet from, all across Canada, or fellow musicians or fellow artists from all over the place. But I was there for 4 weeks, and the first week I was there, it was like a ghost town. It was so eerie. Just some staff there, which were so phenomenally nice and that type of thing. And so that was sort of eerie, but gradually as the weeks went on, it was great. And basically I went into the Banff Suite. I knew going into Banff that I wanted to compose music about the Rockies and about hiking. I love hiking. My wife and I have done numerous trips, day trips on the Bruce Trail and various other paths, and we've hiked in other parts of Canada and the country, but never in and around Banff. And obviously the natural beauty of Banff is so well known. And so for us to spend 4 weeks there and get to hike was great. So this is how this idea for this suite of solo piano pieces known as the Banff Suite was born. It was basically connected to the residency. Basically, we were going to hike a path, and then I would spend a few days sketching out or composing a piece about the experience of hiking that path. And that amassed into a suite of 8 pieces, and that's where we got this.
It's beautiful. And as someone that's spent quite a bit of time in and around Banff, I loved exploring sonically some of those hikes and experiences and places that are very special to me through, listening to the album. Talk to me about your collaborator for this project as Hong Kong Canadian pianist Vicky Chow and how that collaboration came about.
I started my career, my creative music career, as being a composer and performer. I am a pianist, and a lot of my early albums, quite a few years ago, was me playing my own compositions. And as the years have gone on, I've done less and less of that simply because, to be honest, there's just not enough hours in the day. To be a proficient concert pianist, you need to practice a lot, and composing takes up a lot of hours. And as I've been getting commissions and working with collaborators and so forth, it just feels like there's been less and less time. This project was started off as me just wanting to compose these pieces, and then I connected with Vicky later on in the process. But once I composed the pieces and I realized to play all these 8 pieces for someone like me who rarely practices anymore would take a year or two to practice. I just don't have time for that, to get myself back into shape. So I reached out to Vicky, and I didn't know her well. Actually, sort of like the way you and I before this conversation, just in the general music community, connected on social media once in a while, little messages here and there. But otherwise, I don't think really she knew my work very well. And meanwhile, I know her work very well. I mean, Vicky is a fellow Canadian of ours, raised in Vancouver, still has family, deep connections to Vancouver, but she's lived in New York for years. She's very well renowned in the US new music community. And I basically knew her for her reputation of, she's the pianist on Bang on a Can, Ensemble, and really well known for her work there, plus a lot of solo work. Her recordings of the Glass Etudes are quite amazing. So I've always been a fan of hers from afar. And so I just thought, what the heck, I'll reach out, and here we go. And here's some scores, here's some MIDI demos of this, and what does she think? And she replied, and she said, I love these pieces, I think they're great. So once we got funding from the Ontario Arts Council, we were able to bring her up to Toronto and record the album, and her and I workshop the album. And, I would say that 80%, 90% of what you hear on the album was what I composed in Banff and what I originally conceived. But, a lot of, as when you're working on new music, everything is about the detail. And, what I love about the final recording and what Vicky and I collaborated with to make the final recording, I produced the album and worked with her on that, and is that I feel like it really doesn't just showcase my perspective of being in Banff, but it really sort of showcases everything that makes Vicky one of the most preeminent contemporary pianists out there right now, in her specialty in playing new music. And I feel it really shines. So for me, it's just as much her album, and the Banff Suite is just as much her music as it is mine, in that respect. And what a treat, what a treat to work with somebody who has that no holds barred, anything is possible here in order to just pull this off, especially when it's brand new music that no one's ever played before, no one's ever heard before.
I'm always fascinated by the composer collaborator relationship. Can you talk to me a bit more about that and what truly makes for a successful and satisfying collaboration and what really worked between you and Vicky in this instance?
That's a great question. And for me, I look at it from a very sort of practical way, even though it's sort of an emotional relationship. For me, my attitude is, the old school mentality of a composer is, the composer's vision is exactly what we always have to hear and see. And there is that stereotype, and rightfully so. Sometimes composers can be like this. They dig in their heels and it's got to be this way and that type of thing. But for me, it's practical. I don't want to be like that because that's a negative energy that I'm not being open to options. But B, practically, if I want my music to be conveyed the way it is, I'm going to have to let go, basically, in a nutshell. It's a question of, in order to pay respect to the project, that you have to let go. And that means, okay, yes, maybe from a legal or copyright standpoint, I am the owner of this music. But from a spiritual and a creative sense, the composer, I have learned over the years as I've grown older, that I have to let go and let this become theirs and ours together. And by doing that, 99% of the time, actually, the outcome is fantastic. It opens up possibilities that I didn't imagine. It allows me to see that my music can go in directions that I couldn't even imagine. And it's a question of trust and faith. If I approach somebody and I get to know somebody well that I'm going to collaborate with, then you must trust. It's like any other relationship in life. If you don't have trust, you have nothing. And for me, that's really, really important. And there's no other way for me to make music. If one doesn't want to do that, then one should not collaborate. One can just work in a silo, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, But the type of work that I do, most of the projects I work on, I want to collaborate with things. That's a healthy thing for my mental health, to collaborate with and work with other people, especially people that I enjoy. There's a lot of talented people out there. It is possible to find somebody who's on the same wavelength as you, and not just musically, but just thinks about life, and you get along well. Life is too short, I feel. You got to work with people that you enjoy and not be around miserable people.
Changing gears a little bit, in some of your past projects, and perhaps actually this one as well, environmentalism plays a key role in your compositional work and probably your life work as well. Can you talk to me about that, and perhaps if the Banff Suite reflects this as well?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a spot in my heart for environmental issues for a number of years now. A lot of my musical collaborations and projects and compositions have reflected bringing more awareness about environmental issues, and a piece about the natural beauty and humankind's relationship to the beauty of a specific place like Banff is going into that same category. I would say that the one thing that I've appreciated over the years is that while I've always sort of held a certain responsibility in my music, having a responsibility to certain social justice issues like environmental issues or human rights, and I've found that very, very important, that my music as a platform allows people to go deeper into these issues, and it stays true and pays respect to those kind of things. At the same time, the first and foremost, I'm a musician and I'm a composer. So I'm always careful. I'm always been hesitant to be called an activist. I think of myself maybe more as an artivist than an activist. An activist is somebody definitely who is campaigning and picketing and lobbying and putting political pressure. I respect those people, and I've done a teeny bit of that kind of thing in my life, but not a lot. For me, the best human being I can be on this planet is first of all, looking at how I conduct my life and making sure that I'm doing the best I can to leave as little of a footprint on this planet that I can. And that embodies every step of, aspect of my daily life. But then the second thing is to use my creative voice as a platform to bring awareness. And sometimes that comes out in a very activist, in your face type of way. I did a great, wonderful, huge project, in the last couple of years with the Ensemble from Ottawa, called an Auditory survey of the last days of the Holocene. That would definitely be an example of a work that is definitely more in your face and, talking about the climate crisis in a very stark and present it in relentless type of way. But then there's something like the Banff Suite and other projects that I've worked on in the past number of years, which is about, hey, let's just appreciate the beauty of what we have around us, and perhaps appreciating that beauty maybe through music, then we have a heightened awareness of why we need to protect it and that type of thing. So I've always wanted to do it that way. I think I have a varied approach in my music making that way, and I think I do that just more or less for my own mental health. If I was just writing really in your face, very harsh type of pieces, I think I would find that difficult. And like a lot of activists, I'm very sensitive. I don't want to burn out, because this is such a huge issue that's so huge, and there's only so much we can do as artists. So I feel as artists, we just got to do the best we can under the circumstances. And whatever we do is a contribution and good enough. And if it's enough of us out there doing that kind of thing, then I'm optimistic we should be okay.
When listeners encounter your work or your music, what do you hope that they take away from it, from their experience of you, whether it's your more activist self or your introspective self? Do you have an intention that listeners take away or experience? And is that different with different pieces of music, I imagine?
Yeah, I try not to, honestly, I try not to think about that too much when I'm composing. When I'm in my composing headspace, I think for me, the number one thing that I'm trying to convey is the specific emotions or feelings are things I'm trying to convey for myself. And because I see this creative practice that I have a privilege of doing as being, it's a way of my form of communication. Just like if you're having a conversation with another human being, I think to a certain extent, nothing is ever sort of like black and white and it's just like it's either this or that. When we talk to other human beings, we think beforehand, what I'm about to say now might be conveyed in this way. So I will word it or phrase it in a certain way in order, like the classic example in our interaction with human beings is if I say something in a perhaps an outlandish or boisterous way, maybe I might offend somebody, right? So if I don't think about that before, then I might do that. So I guess to a certain extent, like that kind of human communication, I will think about that when I'm composing because my composing is a way that I am communicating with other people. But I try not to do that because I'm concerned that if I'm too concerned about what other people might think, then it might compromise my creative process. But that being said, that's not to say that I'm completely oblivious to that. Like I said, it's not a black and white, I don't care what people think, or I only will do what I do. Obviously, I do have sort of a game plan creatively of what I want to convey emotionally through my music. And in my years, I've always found it fascinating how sometimes the reaction I get from listeners when they share is bang on, exactly what I was thinking, like what I was feeling. But I've also had a number of situations over the years where the reaction was complete opposite, to what I was thinking. And I find that equally as fascinating. And I actually enjoy that. And the reason why I do is simply because when you create music and you put it out there into the world, it becomes less about me at that point. It's more about that individual's relationship to that thing. I'm not a parent, but I would assume that it would be like being a parent. You raise a child and the child goes out there into the world and the world will have their own relationship to that child. It must be similar to that. And I really like that because then it's less about me and it's more about what the music is trying to convey. And that's okay because, we are dealing with everything we're dealing with. Music, is very abstract, right? I mean, who's to say what it literally should mean or not mean or that kind of thing? And I think that's all good, and it really doesn't matter after a while what I was intending or that kind of thing. And that's coming, by the way, from someone like me. I'm very A-type of personality. I love everything being organized and controlled and stuff. So pat myself on the back for that one, for being able to let go, I guess.
Yeah, well done. But that's almost like part of the creative process is the collective response and consciousness around it that results from it being released into the world.
Well, you must get that all the time, right? You're conducting and you present a performance and then people come up to you after and you're like, they're telling you all about this or that, about how they felt. And it's just like, wow, well, when I was getting ready for the performance, I wasn't thinking about any of that. You've had that feeling before?
Oh, 1,000%. And also, repeating repertoire with different ensembles it's totally different experience each time.
Because they have their own spin on it and their own vibe and their own energy, right?
Yeah. And what works for one ensemble? Not necessarily for another. So yeah, it's always a lifelong apprenticeship of always learning and from your surroundings and the folks that you work with.
Also the idea, like I said, of letting go. It's just like you put something out there and, I'm always mildly surprised by this piece is resonating with a lot of people and that kind of thing. And you think in the background, really? It's like, I mean, I like it. I love all of my compositions equally. I don't have any favorites or anything, but it's just like even your own personal perception of what you create is skewed once you put it out there in the world. So that's why I think a lot of times I don't try to think about it too much, because if I think about it too much, I think it would just mess with my mind in a not non-productive way.
What is next for you compositionally?
So, really, I've got a number of things that I'm working on these days, and some collaborations and commissions that are on the go right now. But one thing that I'm really focused on is a new project that I'm working on with a New York-based cellist named Joanne Wong. I'm going to compose for her a suite of pieces for solo cello and fixed electronics. And this collection of works is based on the very sort of a very heavy topic of modern day slavery. So in our world right now, a lot of people might find this shocking to hear, but in our world right now, researchers are estimating that approximately 30 to 40 million people live in slavery, some form of slavery in our world right now. Think about it, there's 40 million people in Canada, is there not? I mean, like, think of the entire population of Canada is enslaved. This is a topic and a project that Joanne and I have been planning for quite a while and in discussions about and researching a lot and reading a lot of books. And we were fortunate enough to get some funding in place. And basically we're launching in, and that's the big project I'm composing literally right now. This is on my radar, and we're hoping for, there is plans, nothing we can announce yet, but mid next year to have a world premiere performance. So this is what I guess what I was talking about earlier about projects you work on deeper, bigger issues than just yourself. And this is sort of in line with a lot of my compositions that explore a lot of social justice issues. And I think the fact that we've been working on planning this out for a few years has been really, really important because of the work that you feel like you need to do justice to tell people's stories through music and working and having conversations and having academics who research these things. There's one particular, Laura T. Murphy, a U.S. American academic who's written numerous books on the issue of modern day slavery. So she's been very supportive of the project. We've had conversations with her. Her writing has inspired the project. So anyway, that is a project that, I'm really excited to be working on and to get out there, because hopefully whatever we create will be able to bring more awareness for an issue that honestly we don't think is being discussed very much. In our mass media culture, we very, very rarely hear any stories about slavery, and it's happening. And it's happening in a very prominent way, but we don't think about that.
Yeah, wow. I'm really moved to hear about that project, and please keep me in the loop.
We're hoping that we'll be able to make an album of it. We'd also like to do some music videos. The project is about the idea of how you walk through your everyday life and how you might see things in your everyday life, but don't realize that what you're seeing might be a situation that involves slavery. So everything from the clothes you're wearing right now to stores or businesses you visit where there are services being rendered, your next door neighbor who's living beside you, you don't know what's going on in that house or whatever. You hear these kind of random stories in the news once in a while. And often as privileged Westerners, we often think, oh, this is something obviously far away. This is something that, third world countries do, because it's, because they're so desperate. Well, guess what? Where I live in Toronto, Highway 401 is considered one of the greatest highways or the largest network of highways in anywhere in the world for human trafficking. You know what I mean? And this is happening right in our own backyard. So as Canadians, we think, oh, we're above all this. I've talked to people associated with the Ontario Provincial Police. They have a task force just dealing with human trafficking and slavery, and they can't keep up. That's why lately I've been noticing, going to airports, in the bathroom of airports, if anybody's ever been, you'll see posters in bathroom stalls. Are you being held with your thing? And there's a 1-800 number. There's a number of great not-for-profit NGOs that are doing fantastic work and trying to help people get out of it. But it is a very, very challenging topic because you often might be viewing or surrounded by people that are enslaved and you don't even know it.
Wow, and music amazes me with its potential to tell very difficult, very dark stories, and that's one of the amazing powers of it, I think.
Yeah, agreed. I've been lucky to explore these kind of different types of situations before in my music, but every time I start one of these, I find it very, very challenging. Just because I want to be careful about my own mental health, because it can be very depressing and it can be very shocking and triggering. And I find that I have to protect my mental health and be able to find that balance in life to work on it, because it is in my heart to keep telling these kind of stories and reflect. I think a big thing as a composer is that one of my other missions in my creative life is to ensure that my music reflects the world I live in. That's why I think, people often ask, why do you write so many environmental pieces? Climate change is only the single greatest threat to our existence on this planet right now. Scientists say we only have 20 to 30 years. I mean, I always want my music to reflect the world I live in. Doesn't it make sense that I would, write a lot of environmental pieces? It's, this is the reality of the world we live in. But other issues too that, touch my heart, and especially things that I hear about that people aren't talking. So I think a lot of times my creative aspect is a way for me to deal with my own personal emotional reaction and like a reaction to the helplessness that I feel. Well, what can I do? I'm only a musician. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a politician or whatever. So this is the only skill I have that I've nurtured in my life. This is what I feel comfortable with. So even though it's hard to sometimes go in that direction, I also feel like it's a natural thing for me to do for those reasons.
Beautiful. I think that's a great way to leave it. Frank Horvat, thank you so much for coming on Musing and speaking so beautifully and candidly about your life work and compositions.
Thank you, Janna. It's been a great pleasure.
This has been Musing on CJSW 90.9 FM in Calgary. I'm your host, Janna Sailor. Thanks for joining me for this celebration of music, creators, and ideas. Musing is a production of the Canadian Music Centre Prairie Region and is heard right here in Calgary and on all major podcast platforms. As we end our time together, we recognize that there are more than 630 First Nations communities across the lands that we now know of as Canada, representing 50 distinct nations and Indigenous languages. In addition, there are Métis in every province of the country and 53 Inuit communities speaking different dialects of Inuktitut across the north. We acknowledge them as the original music makers, dancers, creators, and caretakers of our lands, and they continue to inspire and teach us as we commit to learning and moving forward together. Until next time, thanks for listening and for supporting Canadian musicians and artists in your community. I'll leave you with more music of Frank Horvat.